Some people think football is a matter of life and death. I can assure you it is much, much more important than that. Those words were spoken about the game itself, but they could just as easily have been spoken about the man who has treated football exactly that way for more than 2 decades. Not as a career, not as a talent, as a total life project. Cristiano Ronaldo dos Santos Aveiro was born on February 5th, 1985, on the island of Madeira, a small volcanic rock jutting out of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Portugal. He grew up in a neighborhood called Quinta do Falcão, in the municipality of Funchal, in a modest house that by most accounts was crowded, warm, and short on resources. His father, José Diniz Aveiro, worked as a gardener and part-time kitman for a local football club. His mother, Maria Dolores, was a cook and cleaning woman. They had 4 children. Cristiano was the youngest. The family shared a small space. At times, there was barely enough money for necessities. By any measure, this was not the birthplace of a global superstar. And yet, something started here. Something that no amount of wealth, facility, or privilege could have manufactured. It started in the conditions themselves, and it started with a question that would follow Ronaldo for the rest of his life. What makes someone decide, very early and very clearly, that they are not going to accept the life that has been handed to them? That question sits at the center of Ronaldo's story. Not the trophies, not the records, not the extraordinary physical specimen the man has become in his 30s and 40s. Those are outputs. What matters, if you're studying this career seriously, is the input, the internal logic, the wiring underneath the results. Because Cristiano Ronaldo is not simply a gifted footballer who worked hard. There are thousands of those. He is something rare. He is a person who constructed, with deliberate and sometimes ferocious intention, a mental framework that made ordinary limitations simply irrelevant. He didn't transcend his environment because fortune smiled on him. He transcended it because he built a system for doing so, brick by brick, year by year, starting before he had the vocabulary to describe what he was doing. This script is an attempt to understand that system, not to celebrate it uncritically, not to mythologize the man, but to study the recurring patterns, the repeated behaviors, the consistent principles that explain how a child from Madeira became the most recognized athlete on the planet, and, by many statistical measures, the most decorated footballer in the history of the sport. The goal is to isolate the mental models, to ask not what he achieved, but how he thought, because the thinking came first, always. Let us begin at the beginning. Not the professional beginning, the psychological beginning. Those who knew Ronaldo as a young boy in Funchal describe a child who was, in the most literal sense, possessed by football. His earliest coaches at Andorinha, the local club where his father worked, recall a boy who refused to come off the training pitch. Not because he was told to stay, because leaving felt to him like a kind of loss. He would dribble around the house. He would practice juggling in small spaces. He would play until dark, and then, when dark came, try to find a way to keep playing. His sister, Elma, has spoken about how, as a child, Cristiano would sometimes cry if a game ended and he had to go inside. Not the crying of frustration, the crying of someone being interrupted mid-thought. This is worth pausing on, because in the early life stories of almost every exceptional performer across almost every discipline, you find the same trait, not just interest, compulsion. A relationship with the activity that defies normal cost-benefit calculations. The child does not practice because practice leads to reward. The child practices because not practicing feels wrong. This distinction is fundamental. It means the motivation is internal and self-sustaining. It does not require external fuel. It generates its own. What this creates, over time, is a compounding advantage that can look from the outside like pure natural talent. But what it actually is accumulated hours driven by a quality of attention and desire that most people simply do not bring to anything. At age 10, Ronaldo left Madeira to join Sporting CP's academy in Lisbon. He was a child. He traveled alone, far from his family, to live in a dormitory with older boys in a strange city. He was small. He had a strong regional accent that made him the target of mockery. He was homesick in a way that the adults around him described as physically painful to witness. And yet he stayed, and he trained, and he improved with a speed that alarmed the coaches and players around him. The question is not simply why. The question is how. How does a 10-year-old child, alone, scared, mocked, sustain that level of performance and focus? The answer reveals the first of the deep mental frameworks. The separation from Madeira was not only a physical journey, it was a psychological conversion. Ronaldo, even at that age, had already begun to translate pain into fuel. The homesickness became practice hours. The mockery became motivation. The insecurity about his accent and his background became, over time, the energy source for something relentless. This is a pattern that would repeat across his entire career. Every slight, every criticism, every moment of doubt from someone else would be absorbed and transformed, not dismissed, transformed, used, This is not a casual attitude. It is a discipline. It requires that you hold the wound open long enough to extract what is useful from it, and then, crucially, that you convert it into something constructive rather than destructive. Most people cannot do this consistently. They either dismiss the criticism and learn nothing, or they are crushed by it and lose confidence. Ronaldo found, very early, a third path. He metabolized it. When he was 12, coaches at Sporting discovered something that could have ended everything. Ronaldo was diagnosed with a racing heart, a condition that required surgery. The operation was performed with a laser. He returned to training within weeks. The speed of his return was not simply physical resilience. It was a statement about the relationship between this boy and his football, and about the relative weight of obstacles against the force of his desire to overcome them. Already, at 12 years old, a pattern was forming that would define the next 30 years. Obstacles are information. They are not stop signs. They are problems to be solved. And Ronaldo, from a very young age, was constitutionally incapable of treating a solvable problem as an acceptable permanent condition. He signed for Manchester United in 2003 at the age of 18. He had already played for Sporting's first team. He had already been seen by some of the best football minds in Europe. Sir Alex Ferguson, who had watched every serious young talent in European football for decades, signed him after a preseason friendly in which Ronaldo had tormented United's experienced defenders for 90 minutes. Ferguson would later say that signing Ronaldo was one of the easiest decisions of his career. But what Ferguson saw in that match was not simply technical quality. It was a specific character, a willingness to try things that might fail, an absence of fear about looking foolish, a repetition of moves over and over with slight adjustments, as if the boy were running experiments on defenders in real time. This was not coaching. This was native intellectual curiosity expressed through football. And Ferguson recognized it immediately for what it was. This was a player who would never stop developing, because he was genuinely curious about what he could become. The first years at United were complicated. English football in 2003 was physical, direct, and hostile to the kind of elaborate skill game Ronaldo had learned in Portugal. Defenders fouled him routinely. Some teammates found his exhibitionism irritating. He was inconsistent. His decision-making was criticized. He tried too many tricks. He lost the ball in dangerous positions. And yet Ferguson protected him. Not just because he saw the potential, but because he understood that the process of failing publicly and learning from it was not a detour on the way to greatness. It was the path itself. Ferguson gave Ronaldo something that would prove as valuable as any coaching session. He gave him permission to be imperfect in public, long enough for the imperfection to be processed and corrected. This brings us to the first of the core mental frameworks, and it is perhaps the most important of all. Ronaldo has spent his career operating from what might be called a mastery orientation. A mastery orientation, as opposed to a performance orientation, is a psychological mode in which the primary goal is improvement rather than approval. People with a performance orientation want to look good. They avoid situations where they might fail publicly. They tend to stick to what they know because knowing protects them. People with a mastery orientation want to be better. They seek out challenges that expose their limitations. They treat failure as data. They are not comfortable exactly, but they are energized by difficulty in a way that performance-oriented people find genuinely incomprehensible. The evidence of Ronaldo's mastery orientation is overwhelming and spans his entire career, but nowhere is it more visible than in the way he's repeatedly reinvented himself. The Ronaldo of 2003 was a winger, a spectacular, infuriating, brilliant winger who could beat defenders with pace and trickery, but who contributed, by the standards he would later set, relatively modestly to the actual goal-scoring record of his teams. The Ronaldo of 2007 was already something different. The winger had been refined, the tricks had been disciplined, the decision-making had become ruthlessly efficient. He had begun to understand that entertainment and effectiveness were not the same thing, and that while he enjoyed entertaining, what he actually valued was winning. He scored 23 goals that season. He was named Premier League Player of the Year. He would have been, in most careers, finished with transformation. He had arrived. But Ronaldo was not interested in having arrived. He was interested in what came next. The Ronaldo who moved to Real Madrid in 2009 for a then world record fee of £80 million was no longer even the same positional player. He was transitioning from winger to central forward. He was learning to hold the ball under physical pressure. He was adding new finishing techniques. He was studying defensive structures to understand where the space would appear before it appeared. He had become, in effect, his own coach, in a sense that was extraordinary for a player of that age and quality. Most elite athletes have coaches who push them. Ronaldo had coaches who, by this stage, often found that he had already identified the area of improvement they were planning to address, because he had already studied the footage, already run the experiment, already found the weakness, and begun building the solution. This is the principle that underlies everything else, before any physical training, before any technical refinement, before any tactical intelligence. There's this: A genuine, deep, and permanent commitment to becoming better, not performing better, becoming better. The distinction is everything. Gary Neville, who played alongside Ronaldo at Manchester United, and who is one of the most thoughtful analysts of the modern game, has spoken at length about what he observed during those years. He has described coming in for early morning training to find Ronaldo already on the pitch, working on free kicks. Not the odd free kick, hundreds of them. From the same position, making tiny adjustments, talking to himself, reviewing the result, adjusting again. Neville said that other players would watch Ronaldo train and feel a complicated mixture of admiration and inadequacy, not because he was effortlessly brilliant, but because he was visibly, demonstrably more committed than everyone else. And this matters, because it meant the gap was not fixed. It was being manufactured daily, by choice, by a man who could have stopped at any point and still been one of the best players in the world, but who found that option genuinely unacceptable. The second framework is deeply connected to the first, and it concerns the relationship between identity and performance. Most athletes, when they reach a certain level, develop an identity that is partially defined by that level. They become comfortable, in a subtle and often unconscious way, with being the kind of player who does certain things well. This is natural and human. It provides psychological stability, but it also creates a ceiling, because if your identity is built around your current capabilities, then the prospect of exposing and addressing your limitations feels like a threat to the self. You have to defend your current level, not just because you want to win, but because losing would suggest that you are not who you think you are. This is a trap, and most athletes at some level fall into it. Ronaldo does not appear to have this relationship with his own identity. He has spoken in interviews, repeatedly and without apparent self-consciousness, about areas of his game that he considers weak and is actively working on. He has described studying his own footage for hours, not to confirm what he is good at, but to find what he is not. This is unusual. This is genuinely unusual, because it requires a quality of honesty about the self that most people find psychologically costly. To watch yourself fail repeatedly and not flinch from it and not make excuses for it, but instead treat it as a technical problem requiring a technical solution, is a form of intellectual courage that is rarely discussed in the context of athletics, but that is absolutely central to sustained excellence. In 2008, following Portugal's exit from Euro 2008, Ronaldo gave an interview in which he discussed the specific aspects of his game that had cost his team in the tournament. He spoke with clinical detachment about his positioning in certain phases of play. He spoke about decisions he had made that, on reflection, were wrong. He spoke about things he would do differently. He was 23 years old, and he sounded like a veteran coach analyzing a player he was responsible for developing. Because, in a very real sense, that is exactly what he was. This capacity for rigorous self-assessment without the usual emotional defensiveness is, in a psychological context, extremely difficult to cultivate. It requires separating your sense of worth from your current level of performance. It requires believing that you are valuable not because of what you can already do, but because of the process you are engaged in. Ronaldo has this belief in an almost structural way. He has never, as far as the public record shows, allowed a bad result or a visible weakness to become a story about who he fundamentally is. They are always, in his framing, stories about what he needs to work on next. This is not positivity. It is not optimism in the casual sense. It is a very specific cognitive habit of treating reality as workable, as material, as something that responds to effort rather than something that simply judges you. The third framework is perhaps the most visible one, because it has a physical dimension that is impossible to ignore. It is what might be called the body as project. In the modern era of professional football, every elite player trains hard. Every elite player has access to nutritionists, physiotherapists, sleep coaches, data analysts. The physical infrastructure around elite sport is extraordinary. And yet, even within this environment, Ronaldo stands apart. Not simply in the results, though those are spectacular. He has maintained a body fat percentage reported by those close to him at times below 7%. He has the resting heart rate of a Tour de France cyclist. He is, in his late 30s, physically measurably superior in key athletic metrics to many players 15 years younger than him. This is not genetics, or not genetics alone. This is the result of decades of deliberate physical management. The stories about Ronaldo's relationship with his body are numerous and well-sourced. He has been reported to take up to 5 short sleep sessions per day rather than 1 long one, a practice associated with certain performance optimization theories and one that requires extraordinary personal discipline to implement and maintain. He has been reported to eat 6 small meals per day, timed around his training load, with precise attention to protein content, hydration, and the timing of carbohydrate intake. He has been reported to spend time in a cryotherapy chamber, to follow specific stretching protocols, to avoid alcohol entirely, and to treat social obligations that might interrupt his recovery schedule with a kind of polite but unmistakable firmness. He is known, among those who have played with him, as someone who does not negotiate with his physical preparation. It is not flexible. It is not something that yields to occasion or convenience. It is a system, and it is applied with the consistency of industrial process. Why does this matter as a mental framework rather than simply a physical one? Because the decision to treat the body as a project rather than a given is a cognitive choice before it is a physical one. Most people, including most elite athletes, accept the body they have as, in some fundamental sense, the body they are going to have. They train to optimize it, certainly. But they do not reconceive it. They do not approach it as a construction project that can be fundamentally redesigned through accumulated, consistent, intelligent intervention. Ronaldo approaches his body the way a serious architect approaches a building that needs to be structurally reimagined. He starts with first principles. He asks what a body optimized for this specific activity needs to be able to do. He maps the gap between that ideal and his current physical state, and he builds a system to close that gap, and then to keep the gap closed indefinitely, through maintenance that is as rigorous as the original construction. The results speak with unusual clarity. At 35, Ronaldo was named Serie A Player of the Year. At 36, he became the all-time leading scorer in the history of international football. At 37, he scored against every team he faced in the Premier League. At 38 and 39, playing in Saudi Arabia, he continued to score with a frequency that would have been remarkable for a player 20 years younger. These are not the outputs of someone managing a decline. They are the outputs of someone who refuses, at a level that is almost philosophical, to accept decline as something that simply happens to bodies over time. For Ronaldo, the body ages the way a building ages. And buildings, maintained properly, engineered correctly, and renovated regularly, do not have to deteriorate on anyone else's timeline. The fourth framework is the one that those who have played against Ronaldo speak about most consistently. And it is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated of all. It is the framework of competitive paranoia. The term paranoia is usually pejorative, but in Ronaldo's case, it describes something that is, in fact, an extremely useful psychological state. It is the permanent, active, alert awareness that someone is trying to catch you, that the gap between you and your rivals is never as large as the scoreboard suggests, that the moment you relax your vigilance is the moment the gap begins to close. This is not fear. Fear is paralyzing. This is closer to a form of motivated attention, a sustained scanning of the competitive landscape that keeps the standards of effort permanently calibrated to the highest possible mark. The clearest example of this framework in action is Ronaldo's relationship with Lionel Messi. For a decade, roughly from 2008 to 2018, these two players existed in a competitive dialogue that had no real precedent in the history of team sport. Both were, by objective measures, operating at levels that had simply never been reached before in their game. Across those 10 years, they shared 8 Ballon d'Or awards between them, with every other player on the planet competing for the scraps. And what is striking, if you study Ronaldo's behavior during this period, is that Messi's excellence did not diminish him. It provoked him. Every time Messi won an award, Ronaldo trained harder. Every time Messi scored a record goal, Ronaldo began constructing the conditions to set a new one. The rivalry was not destructive to Ronaldo's performance. It was constitutive of it. He needed a standard. He needed something external that was always pulling him forward. And Messi, by existing at the level he existed at, gave Ronaldo perhaps the most valuable thing any competitor can give another, an always moving target that required the best possible version of himself to pursue. This is a mental model that is both unusual and teachable to a degree. Most people, when confronted with a rival who is performing at an extremely high level, experience a version of demoralization. The gap feels too large. The excellence feels like judgment on their own inadequacy. They pull back, recalibrate their goals downward, and find a more comfortable level to operate at. Ronaldo does the opposite. He uses the rival's excellence as a calibrating instrument. He asks not what separates them, but what would have to change in himself to close that distance. He then builds the plan to make those changes. And he executes. This is competitive paranoia in its most sophisticated form. It is not fear of losing. It is the active, energizing use of a rival's excellence as the highest available benchmark for your own development. The fifth framework concerns an area that is often misunderstood in Ronaldo's case, because it sits in uncomfortable tension with his public persona. It is what might be called the clarity of singular purpose. Ronaldo has, throughout his career, been criticized for being selfish, for shooting when he should pass, for taking free kicks when other players might have better angles, for maintaining a level of self-referentiality in press conferences that can border on the solipsistic. Some of this criticism is fair in its observation, even if the framing as simply a character flaw misses something important. Because what looks like selfishness from one angle looks, from another, like an extraordinary clarity of purpose. Ronaldo has spent his career asking, in effect, a single question. What is the highest value action available to me in this moment, given what I am trying to achieve? And what he is trying to achieve, always, is to win football matches by scoring goals, because that is the specific mechanism through which his particular set of capabilities produces the most value. He is not indifferent to teammates. He is not incapable of generosity or sacrifice. But his understanding of his own role within a team is exceptionally precise. And that precision allows him to make decisions that, in the aggregate, produce outcomes that a more diffuse and less directed version of the same talent simply could not. The clearest illustration of this is in the statistics. Ronaldo has scored more goals than any player in the history of professional football. The number, which continues to rise, is at the time of this writing over 900 across all competitions. To put this in context, most professional footballers who have long and successful careers score somewhere between 100 and 200 goals in their lifetimes. Players considered elite often reach 300 or 400. To reach 900 requires not just quality and longevity, but a specific and sustained commitment to placing yourself in goal-scoring positions, to making the decisions that lead to goals, and to refusing to be deterred from that pursuit by anything, including team dynamics, managerial preferences, or the social friction that sometimes accompanies the kind of relentless statistical ambition Ronaldo brings to goal scoring. He has said in various formulations over the years that he always believes he will score, not that he hopes to, not that he expects to in some general sense, that he believes, concretely and specifically, that in any match he plays in, he will score. This is not delusion. This is a practiced cognitive state, a state of certainty about his own preparation that makes hesitation in the crucial moments genuinely impossible. He has done the work, he has taken the shots, he has studied the goalkeepers, he has practiced the specific movements and the specific finishes until they are not decisions, but reflexes. And so, when the moment arrives, there is nothing to calculate. There is only action. This quality of certainty rooted in preparation, rather than in ego or bravado, is something that the best performers in almost any competitive field describe in very similar terms. It is the feeling of knowing that you have done everything in your power to be ready, which creates a kind of freedom in the moment of performance that cannot be manufactured any other way. It cannot be talked yourself into. It cannot be supplied by a coach's pre-match speech. It can only be earned, repeatedly, through the accumulation of preparation so thorough that doubt becomes logically untenable. There is a story about Ronaldo at Real Madrid that circulated among players and staff for years. It is sourced from multiple former teammates and coaching staff who were present during his tenure at the club. During a training session in preparation for a Champions League knockout match, the squad had finished their scheduled session and the coaches had called time. Players were drifting toward the tunnel. Ronaldo had stayed on the pitch, working on a specific type of run into the box, a near-post movement off a central striker's hold-up play. He was running the same path over and over, asking the assistant who had stayed behind to play precise balls into the striker's feet so he could practice the timing of his arrival. He did this for 40 minutes after the session ended. When someone finally asked him why, he said simply that in the film review he'd noticed that his near-post timing in the first phase of a run was half a second late against high defensive lines. Half a second. And that half a second was the difference between arriving in space and arriving with a defender at his shoulder. He had noticed it. He was fixing it. He would not leave until it was fixed. 40 minutes of extra work for a half-second adjustment in the timing of a run that, if correct, would put him in a marginally better position to score one specific type of goal against one specific type of defensive setup. This is the scale at which this mind operates, not the scale of, I need to work harder. The scale of, I have identified a specific technical subproblem, I know what the solution looks like, and I will practice the solution until the subproblem is resolved. This is engineering applied to football. And it is the reason that when the match came and the near-post run presented itself and the ball arrived and the defender was not there, nobody watching on television understood what they were actually seeing. They saw a goal. They saw Ronaldo arriving at exactly the right moment. What they did not see was the 40 minutes 3 days earlier when that moment was quietly constructed. The sixth framework is one that is easy to overlook because it is, in some sense, the most ordinary sounding. But in practice, it is among the most powerful and the most rare. It is the framework of consistent standards in the absence of external validation. Consider what this means in practice. Ronaldo has spent periods of his career at clubs where the team was struggling. He has played in tactical systems that did not suit his strengths. He has had managers who did not fully understand how to use him. He has played in leagues, most recently in Saudi Arabia, where the overall quality of competition was significantly below what he had experienced in Europe. And in every one of these contexts, he has continued to perform at the highest available level. He has continued to train as though he were preparing for a Champions League final. He has continued to push himself by the internal standards that were set decades ago, regardless of what the external environment demands or expects. This is unusual because most humans calibrate their effort to the standards of their environment. We work as hard as the people around us. We perform to the level that the situation seems to require. This is not laziness. It is a form of social intelligence, a reading of what the context demands, but it has a cost. The cost is that when the environment lowers its standards, so does the individual. When the competition weakens, the training lightens. When the scrutiny decreases, the effort tends to follow. Ronaldo appears to have internalized his standards at a level that makes them genuinely independent of context. He is not training to keep up with his environment. He is training according to a set of standards that he set a long time ago and that he has maintained with a consistency that is almost architectural in its solidity. This means that when he returned to Manchester United in 2021 at the age of 36, after more than a decade in Spain and Italy, he was not a lesser version of the player who had left. In certain respects, he was a more refined version. Not faster, not more extravagant, but more precise, more efficient, more clinical, because the standards had not dropped during the years when nobody was comparing him to the Premier League. The construction had continued quietly, according to its own internal logic. There is a quote that Ronaldo has given in slightly different forms across the years, always to the same effect. He has said that he does not need people to remind him how good he is. He knows what he has done. He knows what he is capable of. He needs only to be given the conditions to demonstrate it. This sounds like arrogance, and in a certain tone it can seem that way. But stripped of the tone, what it describes is something profoundly functional. He is describing a person who does not require external approval to sustain his sense of the project, who does not need validation from coaches, journalists, fans, or even awards to know whether the work is worth doing, who has, in the most literal sense, moved the standards inside himself and stopped looking for them outside. The seventh framework is one that is rarely discussed in this context, but that appears consistently in any serious study of elite sustained performance. It is the framework of emotional management under public scrutiny. Ronaldo has lived under an extraordinary level of public attention for more than 20 years. He has been photographed, analyzed, criticized, celebrated, and discussed in virtually every media market on the planet. His relationships have been tabloid fodder. His celebrations on the pitch have been dissected by analysts and criticized by philosophers of the sport. His body language after a missed shot has been the subject of essays. His relationship with his critics has itself been a recurring subject of his critics. All of this is noise. And the ability to function, to train, to perform, and to develop in the presence of that amount of noise is a capability that is not automatically bundled with footballing talent. It has to be developed. And Ronaldo has developed it to a degree that deserves serious study. The mechanism he appears to use is a combination of two things. The first is a very clear compartmentalization. There's the public world, in which he is a figure about whom people have strong and often contradictory opinions. And there is the private world of training, preparation, and performance, which operates according to its own logic and is not penetrated by the public world. This is not the compartmentalization of dissociation or denial. It is an active, maintained boundary that requires regular enforcement. There are documented stories of Ronaldo arriving at training sessions the morning after significant public criticism and performing at his highest level. Not because the criticism didn't register, but because he had made a decision, apparently very early in his career, that his training standards would not be a function of the public mood. The training pitch was protected space. The second mechanism is something that is harder to articulate, but that those close to him have gestured at in interviews. It is a kind of selective absorption. The criticism that concerns him is performance-related and technical. Was that the right decision? Was that the optimal position? Could that finish have been better? This criticism he takes seriously, from sources he respects, and uses as material for improvement. The criticism that concerns his personality, his celebration style, his public persona, his level of self-regard, he appears to filter with great efficiency, not because he is oblivious to it, but because it does not have a clear action associated with it. You cannot improve your way out of people finding your personality abrasive. So the question of what to do with that information has, for Ronaldo, a clean answer. Nothing. File it. Return to training. This is a form of cognitive efficiency that is more sophisticated than it sounds. Most people are unable to categorize criticism this cleanly. We take the technical and the personal together, which means that even useful feedback gets tangled up in emotional defensiveness, and useless criticism sometimes feels as weighty as the real thing. Ronaldo appears to have developed a sorting mechanism that operates quickly and accurately, which means he spends less cognitive energy on the noise and more on the signal. Over a career, this compounds. The hours not spent managing the emotional aftermath of irrelevant criticism are hours available for preparation, analysis, and development. The eighth framework concerns the way Ronaldo has handled the specific challenge of time. Not time management in the mundane sense, something more existential. The challenge of a professional athlete knowing that the game's relationship with the body is finite, that the clock is always running, and that the correct response to this reality is not panic or denial, but a very specific form of forward planning. Ronaldo has spoken throughout his career about the fact that he thinks ahead, not just tactically on the pitch, but about his career arc, about what kind of player he wants to be at what age, about what adjustments will be required as his physical capacities evolve. This is unusual. Most athletes, even elite ones, operate in a kind of productive present tense. They focus on the current season, the current match, the current training session. The future is abstract. For Ronaldo, the future appears to have always been partially present. He has always been playing a version of the game that is slightly ahead of where he currently is, in order to be ready when he arrives there. The clearest evidence of this is the way he has shifted his physical game over time. The Ronaldo of his early 20s relied heavily on pace and explosive athleticism. He was fast in a way that was almost unfair, a direct, devastating runner who could get behind any defensive line. But Ronaldo, watching himself and watching the data, understood that this particular advantage would diminish with age. Pace is one of the first physical attributes to fade. So, with a deliberateness that coaches who have worked with him have described as remarkable, he began building a game that would function without elite pace. He developed a more sophisticated movement pattern. He learned to read defensive shape and find positions where pace was not the primary requirement. He sharpened his heading, already excellent, into something extraordinary, able to generate power and precision from heights and positions that defenders found nearly impossible to anticipate. He developed a repertoire of finishing techniques, driven and placed and chipped and headed and free kick, that gave him options in every situation, so that even when one tool was less available, another was ready. This is not post hoc rationalization. The pattern is visible in the statistics over time. The profile of his goal contribution has changed in a way that is consistent with a deliberate recalibration, not a natural decay. He's not doing less of what he used to do and getting by. He has built a different engine and is running it at the same output level. This is an extraordinary achievement, and it is an achievement of planning before it is an achievement of physicality. You have to decide to do this. You have to decide to accept a temporary reduction in some capacities in order to develop others. You have to be willing to look for a period, like you're declining, in order to emerge on the other side with a different and in some ways more sustainable form of excellence. The ninth framework is one that cuts across every other and that, in many ways, is the most psychologically interesting. It is the framework of the story Ronaldo tells himself about himself. Every human being operates from a self-narrative, a story about who they are, where they came from, what they are doing, and why. This narrative shapes what information they attend to, what they remember, what possibilities they can even imagine for themselves. For many people, the self-narrative is limiting. It contains embedded beliefs about what kind of person they are, what they are capable of, and what they deserve, that constrain behavior in ways they are often not even aware of. Ronaldo's self-narrative is, by every available indication, one of the most powerfully constructive self-stories that has ever operated in professional sport. It is a story in which hardship is evidence of strength, because only the strong come through it, in which obstacles are opportunities to demonstrate what you are made of, in which criticism confirms the importance of the project, because important things attract detractors, in which every setback is temporary and every achievement is a step in an ongoing and upward trajectory. This narrative is not simply positive thinking. It is structured. It has a specific architecture. And at its foundation is the origin story from Madeira, the child who had nothing, the family that struggled, the accent that was mocked, the tiny island that no one had ever heard of as a football production ground. This origin story for Ronaldo functions not as a source of shame to be overcome, but as a source of identity to be carried. He references it constantly in acceptance speeches, in interviews, in his own written reflections, not as a performance of humility, as a genuine reminder of the distance that has been covered, and therefore of the kind of force that has been demonstrated in covering it. There is something deeply important about this. When you have come from where Ronaldo has come from and arrived where he has arrived, the journey itself becomes proof of a principle. The principle is the gap between where you are and where you could be is crossable if you are willing to do what is required. For most people, this principle is abstract, inspiring in theory, disconnected from their actual experience. For Ronaldo, it is not abstract. He has lived it. He has crossed a gap that, from the outside, looked uncrossable. And so when the next gap appears, the one between his current level and the next level he is trying to reach, he has experiential evidence that gaps can be crossed. He has done it before. He will do it again. The story the past tells about him is also the story the future is waiting to tell. This is why Ronaldo has been described by psychologists working in elite sport as one of the clearest examples of what the literature calls a growth mindset. But the common understanding of that term undersells what is actually happening. A growth mindset is not just believing you can get better. It is having an entire cognitive architecture organized around the principle of development as the primary mode of existence. It is treating the present always as a stage, not as a destination. It is being genuinely more interested in who you are becoming than in who you already are. Ronaldo has this quality at a level that makes even accomplished people in other fields feel, when they study him closely, something between admiration and a kind of vertiginous wonder. Because if someone from Madeira, without resources, without connections, without the comfortable foundation that we tend to think of as the prerequisite for excellence, can build what he has built through this cognitive architecture alone, then the question becomes unavoidable. What is everyone else doing with their time? The 10th framework is the last, and it is, in a way, the one that holds all the others together. It is the framework of total ownership. Ownership in this context does not mean ownership of a club or an enterprise, though Ronaldo has built considerable business interests. It means something more fundamental. It means the radical, consistent, all circumstances refusal to locate the cause of his outcomes anywhere other than in himself. When things go wrong for most people, the first instinct is to look for the external cause, the referee, the manager, the team, the schedule, the pitch, the weather. This is not malice. It is a very human cognitive defense. Because if the cause is external, then the outcome was not your responsibility, and your sense of yourself as capable and valuable is protected. But there is a price. The price is that you have given away the ability to change the outcome. If someone else caused the problem, only someone else can fix it. You are a passenger. Ronaldo does not appear to take this exit, even when it would be entirely reasonable to do so. He has played for managers who misused him. He has played in teams that were not good enough to win the trophies he was trying to win. He has suffered individual failures in major competitions that would, for almost any other player, be framed at least partially in terms of circumstances beyond their control. And yet, the consistent public and private framing from Ronaldo is always about what he could have done better, what he prepared imperfectly, what he chose incorrectly, what he will now change. The most powerful example of this is his relationship with the Champions League, the tournament that, for Ronaldo, carries the heaviest emotional weight. He has won it 5 times, a record shared with no one. He was the first player to score in the final with 3 different clubs. He has produced moments in the Champions League that have entered the permanent catalog of the sport's greatest individual performances. And yet, in the tournaments where Portugal or his club fell short, the dominant note in his public response has always been the same. He did not do enough. He will be better. He owns the gap between the result and what it could have been, and he treats that gap as his responsibility to close. This is not false modesty. It is a very precise cognitive choice about where the locus of control lives. If Ronaldo's success is primarily his, then his failures are also primarily his. And if his failures are primarily his, then they are primarily within his power to correct. This logic, followed consistently, means that you never have to simply accept a result. You always have something you can do. You always have a next step. The gap is always, in principle, closable. You just have to find the work that closes it and then do it. Across 30 years of professional and near-professional footballing life, this framework has been applied with a consistency that is genuinely without precedent in the sport. There have been periods of frustration. There have been moments of visible emotion in press conferences, interviews, and on the pitch. Ronaldo is not a machine. He feels things. He has spoken about the difficulty of certain periods of his career. The death of his father from alcoholism when Ronaldo was still a teenager at United, the loneliness of early years in Lisbon and then Manchester, the weight of the expectations that accumulate around a career like this, which eventually become impossible to fully satisfy because the only person setting them is yourself. These pressures are real, and they register. But they register as fuel and as information, not as conclusions. They do not change the fundamental orientation, which is always forward, always constructive, always asking the same question: what do I need to do next to be better than I currently am? In the summer of 2022, at the age of 37, Ronaldo found himself in a situation that would have seemed, to an outside observer, like the beginning of an inevitable end. He was at Manchester United for the second time. The team was struggling, and he was not fully integrated into the tactical system. By November of that year, an extraordinary interview he gave to journalist Piers Morgan had brought the tensions into the open in a way that accelerated his departure from the club. By January 2023, he was at Al Nasser in Saudi Arabia, a league that the European football establishment treated as a retirement destination. Many in the media wrote explicitly about the decline of Ronaldo, about the end of the era, about the end of the man. What happened was, by Ronaldo's standards, entirely predictable. He scored over 50 goals in his first full Saudi season. He broke the record for the most goals scored in Saudi professional football. He was named the league's best player. He attracted an audience to Saudi football that the league had never previously generated. He did this not through nostalgia for what he had been, but through the same application of the same frameworks he had been using since he was a child in Madeira. He arrived in the environment, assessed the gap between where he was and where the highest standard in that environment was, and then systematically closed it. Not because the standard was particularly high by the measure he has historically used, but because it was the available standard, and closing available gaps is what he does. It is not a choice he makes consciously, in the sense of deliberating each time. It is who he is. It is the operating system. The question of whether Ronaldo is the greatest footballer of all time is one that has generated more debate than almost any other question in the history of sport. It is also, if you are studying mental frameworks rather than match statistics, largely beside the point, because what Ronaldo represents is not primarily an argument about rankings. It is a case study in what becomes possible when a human being commits completely, totally, and irrevocably to a project of self-development, and then sustains that commitment across conditions that would have ended the project of most other people before it really began. The conditions that would have ended it include poverty, geographical isolation, childhood illness, the death of a parent, the collapse of several peak career opportunities due to team dysfunction, the relentless and sometimes cruel public scrutiny of every dimension of his personal life, the psychological weight of existing in permanent comparison with another player of generational greatness, the natural biological processes of aging, and the temptation, which must have been enormous at various points, to simply accept a level of excellence that by any normal measure would have been more than sufficient. None of these conditions ended it. That is the fact. And the explanation for that fact is not luck, though luck played its role. It is not talent, though talent was present. It is the frameworks, the mental architecture, the operating system, the mastery orientation that treats improvement as the primary goal, the identity that is built on the process rather than the position, the body treated as a project, the competitive paranoia that converts rivalry into fuel, the singular purpose that cuts through distraction, the consistent internal standards that do not yield to external conditions, the emotional management that protects the training space, the forward thinking that prepares for future challenges before they arrive, the self-narrative that converts origin into engine, and the radical ownership that refuses to place the locus of control anywhere outside the self. These are not 10 separate traits that happen to coexist in one person. They are an integrated system. Each one reinforces the others. The mastery orientation only sustains because the identity supports it. The body project only continues because the internal standards don't lower. The competitive paranoia only produces positive outcomes because the ownership framework directs its energy productively rather than destructively. They are, together, a cognitive and behavioral machine for the production of excellence over time. And that machine was assembled piece by a person who started with almost none of the conventional prerequisites for its construction. There is a story told by several people who have spent time around Ronaldo at training. The story varies in its details, but is consistent in its core. After a training session, after the official session is over and the coaches are packing up and the other players are heading for the showers, Ronaldo stays. He takes a ball to a specific spot on the pitch. He places it carefully. He runs up. He shoots. He watches where the ball goes. He adjusts something small. He retrieves the ball or calls for someone to return it. And he does it again and again and again. He is not improving his shooting in general. He has already done that. He is working on something specific, some small angle, some particular body weight shift, some fraction of release timing that he has identified from film or from the match or from some internal analysis as suboptimal. He is closing a gap, not because anyone asked him to, not because the session requires it, because the gap exists, and the existence of a gap is, to him, a kind of invitation he is constitutionally unable to decline. This is, in miniature, the entire story. This is the principle at work in its most elemental form, and it is worth ending here, on this image, because it strips away everything that can obscure what is actually happening in a career like this. It strips away the fame and the wealth and the records and the trophies and the controversies and the debates. It strips it all back to this, a person and a ball and a specific problem to solve, and the refusal to leave until the problem is smaller than it was when they arrived, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. Ronaldo once said, "I'm not a perfectionist, but I like to feel that things are done well. More important than that, I feel an endless need to learn, to improve, to evolve, not only to please the coach and the fans, but to feel satisfied with myself. It is my conviction that there are no limits to learning, and that it can never stop, no matter what our age." Read that slowly. There are no limits to learning, no matter what our age. This is not a statement for a motivational poster. This is a description of how a specific mind actually functions. It is an honest account of an internal state that has been present since a boy in Madeira refused to come inside when the training was over. The conviction that the next version is always possible. The certainty that the gap between where you are and where you could be is real and crossable and yours to close. The understanding that this project does not have a completion date. That conviction is what 5 Ballon d'Or awards look like. That conviction is what 900 goals look like. That conviction is what 37 years old and still performing at an elite level looks like. Not the visible outputs, the invisible engine, the thing underneath, the thing that was running before anyone was watching, and will probably still be running after the last match is played and the last record is broken, and the last argument about legacy has reached whatever inconclusive conclusion arguments about legacy always reach. The island of Madeira is 741 square kilometers. It has a population of around 250,000 allotted people. It has produced in its history one athlete who changed the global understanding of what football could be, not because it was the most likely place for such a person to emerge, but because, in that particular combination of origin and character and framework and refusal to accept limits, something formed that could not be shaped anywhere else, under those specific pressures, into anything other than exactly what it became. The study of Cristiano Ronaldo is, in the end, the study of a question that applies to every person who has ever seriously wanted something they didn't yet have. The question is not whether you can get there. The question is what you are willing to build inside yourself to make the journey possible. And what Ronaldo demonstrates across the full arc of a life and a career that is still unfolding is that the building never really stops, that the person who keeps building is the person who keeps arriving, and that the day you decide the building is finished is the day the thing you are building begins, quietly to fall. There's a pattern that appears again and again across the full span of this career, and it is worth naming explicitly because it is the kind of pattern that you only see when you step back from the individual moments and look at the shape of the whole thing. The pattern is this. Every time an external voice declared something finished, something concluded, something beyond Ronaldo's grasp, the response was not argument, it was performance. The response was always and only performance. In 2008, when some Portuguese media questioned whether he had the mental strength to handle the largest stages, he won the Champions League. When critics argued he was inferior to Messi in the specific category of footballing intelligence, he spent 3 years systematically developing the footballing intelligence dimension of his game until the gap they were measuring no longer existed in the same form. When people argued his best years were behind him at 30, he had what many analysts consider the most statistically prolific season of his career at 32. When people argued that his move to Juventus was a retreat from the highest competitive level, he responded by winning the Serie A Player of the Year award in his debut season. When people argued that Saudi Arabia was a retirement gesture, he responded by scoring at a rate that would have placed him among the top performers in almost any league in Europe. This is the pattern. The criticism arrives, he absorbs it, files it, converts it, and the next available platform becomes the response. Not the press conference, not the social media post, the pitch, the goal, the result. This is a man who has understood from an early age that argument is noise and performance is signal, and that the only response to doubt worth delivering is the kind that cannot be disputed in a box score. The relationship between criticism and performance is one that athletes navigate in vastly different ways. Some are destroyed by criticism. They internalize it, it disrupts their concentration, it alters their behavior on the pitch in ways that confirm the critic's concerns. Some develop a kind of protective numbness to it, learning to functionally ignore external voices, which protects them from the downside, but also removes a potentially useful source of calibrating information. Ronaldo has found a third path that is functionally unusual. He feels the criticism. He does not pretend otherwise. In interviews over the years, he has acknowledged being affected by media commentary, by public opinion, by the sting of doubt from sources he cannot entirely dismiss. He is not numb, but what he does with the feeling is unique. He uses the emotional energy of being doubted as a supplementary propellant for the physical and cognitive effort of preparation. The criticism does not distort the work. It intensifies it, and the intensified work produces the performance that renders the criticism obsolete. Then the next cycle begins. Ferdinand Marcos. No, Rio Ferdinand, who was Ronaldo's teammate at Manchester United for 5 years and who has analyzed his career with unusual candor in various public forums, once described watching Ronaldo in training the morning after a match in which he had missed 2 significant chances. Ferdinand said he expected to find a player carrying the psychological weight of the misses. What he found instead was a player who appeared to be in a state of concentrated absorption, working on finishing from the exact angles and positions where the misses had occurred the previous night, as if the match had simply been a diagnostic session that had identified 2 problems requiring technical solutions, and the solutions were now being built. Ferdinand said he found this quality both inspiring and, honestly, a little unsettling, because it suggested a relationship with failure that operated completely differently from the way almost all other footballers he had known processed it. The processing of failure is one of the most underappreciated components of long-term athletic excellence. The public discussion of elite performance tends to focus on the positive moments, the winning goals, the championship celebrations, the trophies lifted and the records broken. But the ratio of failure to success, even in the career of the most decorated footballer who has ever lived, is heavily weighted toward failure. Ronaldo has missed hundreds of goals he expected to score. He has misplaced passes in crucial moments. He has had tournaments and matches that fell below what he considered acceptable. He has lost finals. He has been substituted out of matches. He's been dropped from squads. All of these things have happened, and in the normal human accounting of career outcomes, they are the majority experience. Excellence does not mean the elimination of failure. It means the development of a relationship with failure that extracts its informational value, discards its psychological toxicity, and returns the practitioner to the work as quickly as possible. Ronaldo does this faster than almost anyone who has studied him can explain by conventional psychological mechanisms. The recovery time, the bounce-back rate, the speed at which a bad performance is converted into a training stimulus rather than a confidence wound is extraordinary. And it appears to be not an innate property of his emotional constitution, because he is clearly and visibly a person who feels things deeply but a practiced discipline, a habit of mind that has been built and reinforced over so many repetitions that it now operates at near automatic speed. There are several recorded instances where Ronaldo addressed this directly. In a long interview following Portugal's elimination from a major tournament, he was asked whether he had been depressed after the result. He said something that has stayed in the minds of those who have studied his career closely. He said that he had been sad, that the night of the result had been painful, that he had thought about the match and his contribution to the outcome and felt the full weight of the disappointment. And then he said that in the morning, he had woken up and begun preparing for the next thing, not because the sadness had passed completely, but because the preparing and the improving were the only responses to sadness that he had ever found actually useful. That sitting with it beyond a certain point was a choice to extend the pain without learning anything new from it. And extending pain without extracting information from it was something he simply did not allow himself. This is, stated plainly, an extraordinarily sophisticated emotional discipline. It is the kind of thing that therapists spend years helping patients develop, and many never achieve it fully. To be able to feel the full depth of a disappointment, and then to set a clear and deliberate time boundary on the passive experience of that disappointment, and to convert it into active preparation, requires a very precise and practiced sense of which emotions are useful in which quantities and for how long. Ronaldo has this calibration in a way that is, among professional athletes, genuinely exceptional. And it is not an accident. It is not luck. It is the product of a mental discipline practiced over decades, in small moments that no cameras ever captured, until the discipline became habit, and the habit became character. There is another dimension of Ronaldo's career that is rarely framed as a mental model, but that, on close inspection, reveals something important about his approach to the competitive landscape. It is his relationship with what might be called contextual intelligence, the ability to read the specific environment in which you are competing and make adjustments, not just to your performance, but to your expectations, your priorities, and your preparation based on what that specific environment requires. When Ronaldo moved to Real Madrid in 2009, he was entering arguably the highest pressure individual performance environment in club football. The Bernabeu crowd expected goals, they expected spectacle, they expected the kind of consistent brilliance that in any other context would be considered exceptional, but in Madrid was the minimum acceptable standard. The media scrutiny was total. The comparison to his predecessor, Raul, and to Messi, his contemporary, was constant. And Ronaldo not only met the standard, he exceeded it in a way that had never been done before. He scored 50 goals in a single La Liga season. He was the first player to score at least 25 league goals in 7 consecutive seasons. He won 4 Champions Leagues in 5 years. He did this while adapting his game to a specific tactical context, the intense verticality of Real Madrid's attacking play under various coaches, and while managing the specific psychological environment of a club where expectation operates, at a level that has historically ended or diminished careers that were genuinely excellent. The contextual intelligence reveals itself most clearly in how Ronaldo behaved in each of these environments, not as himself unchanged, but as himself adapted. The Ronaldo of Old Trafford was different from the Ronaldo of the Bernabeu. The Ronaldo of the Bernabeu was different from the Ronaldo of the Juventus Stadium. The Ronaldo of Al Nassr's King Saud University Stadium is different again. In each context, the core frameworks are the same. The preparation ethic, the competitive paranoia, the mastery orientation, the body as project. But the expression of those frameworks has been calibrated to the specific demands of the context. He has never been someone who arrived at a new environment and tried to impose his old patterns on it. He has arrived, assessed, adapted, and then performed. The adaptation is not compromise, it is intelligence. It is the recognition that excellence is not a single fixed behavior applied uniformly across contexts, but a set of principles applied with enough flexibility to be appropriate to each specific situation. This pattern repeats in the national team context with particular force. Portugal, for most of Ronaldo's international career, has been a team of talented individuals organized around his presence in a way that created as many tactical challenges as it resolved. The burden of expectation on Ronaldo in the national shirt has been, in effect, the expectation of an entire football nation, a small country that knows it is competing against nations with far larger talent pools. And that has experienced the weight of historical near misses, including the 1966 World Cup, where Eusebio came so close. Ronaldo has carried this weight for more than 20 years. He has had tournaments where the team failed around him while he performed. He has had tournaments where both succeeded. He led Portugal to victory at Euro 2016, a tournament in which Portugal were arguably not the best team on the pitch for most of their matches, but in which Ronaldo's presence and leadership created a psychological architecture around the squad that enabled them to find results that pure footballing quality would not have guaranteed. And then, after going off injured in the final, he became the most animated presence on the bench, coaching, encouraging, directing, unable to play and yet unable to separate himself from the collective project. That image of Ronaldo on the touchline in street clothes, practically playing the match through the bodies of his teammates, says something significant about what this project means to him. It is not ego. It is investment. Total, unconditional, borderline irrational investment in a collective outcome. The question of legacy, in Ronaldo's case, is complicated by the fact that he is still writing it. He is still playing, still scoring, still training, still waking up in the morning and applying the frameworks that have defined his career since before most of his Saudi League opponents were old enough to have a favorite football player. The legacy is not yet a fixed object that can be assessed at a fixed distance. It is a continuing process, which is, in itself, a statement about the mental models at work. Most careers have a natural arc. They build toward something and then they conclude. Ronaldo's career seems to have been designed, deliberately or otherwise, to resist conclusion. Not because he is unwilling to acknowledge mortality or limitation, but because the concluding conditions that he has set for himself are defined by internal standards, not by age, not by league quality, not by market perception. He will stop when the internal standards say it is time. And the internal standards, as far as anyone outside the mind can tell, have not yet said so. The football world has spent 30 years trying to find the correct frame for this career. The debate about Messi versus Ronaldo is the most exhaustive comparative analysis in the history of sport, and it has produced no consensus, not because the evidence is insufficient, but because the two careers represent different answers to different questions, and neither question has a wrong answer. What is the most beautiful and intelligent expression of footballing genius? And separately, what is the most determined, disciplined, relentlessly constructed footballing excellence? These are both legitimate questions. They are both worth studying. The study of Ronaldo is the study of the second question in its purest form. If you are a researcher of human excellence, if you are trying to understand how capability is built and maintained over time, if you are asking what the architecture of a decades-long commitment to improvement looks like from the inside, then this is the career you study. Because it is the most documented, the most analyzed, the most statistically rich case in the history of the discipline. Every year of development is on film. Every goal is cataloged. Every achievement is cross-referenced against age, league quality, physical metrics, and competitive context. The data set is extraordinary. And what it shows, if you look at it with the right questions, is not a natural talent moving through a successful career. It is a deliberate construction project, operated by a single consciousness, sustained across conditions that included poverty and illness and loss and loneliness, and the constant company of doubt for a period of time so long that the project itself has become one of the defining cases in the study of human performance. There is one more dimension worth examining before we close, and it is the dimension that is perhaps the most difficult to quantify, but the most revealing when observed. It is what those closest to Ronaldo have described as his relationship with the interior life of excellence, with what it feels like to operate at this level, from the inside. People who have had long and honest conversations with Ronaldo about his experience of his own career report something surprising. They report that he does not describe himself as living in a state of permanent satisfaction. He does not describe a sense of having arrived. He describes something closer to a state of permanent productive dissatisfaction, a condition in which every achievement is, genuinely and immediately, the foundation for the next question, rather than the answer to the previous one. He wins the Champions League and he wants to know what he needs to do to win it again. He scores a record goal and he wants to know which record is next. He wins a Ballon d'Or and he starts preparing the case for the next one before the celebration has ended. This is not a performance of humility. It is not a public relations strategy. Those who have been in the room describe it as authentic, as a genuine expression of how his mind actually processes achievement. This is psychologically unusual. Most people, when they achieve a significant goal, experience a period of satisfaction that is followed by a recalibration toward the next goal. The satisfaction period is real, and it serves a function. It is the reward signal that reinforces the behavior. But for Ronaldo, this period appears to be extremely brief, perhaps almost imperceptible, before the processing has already moved on to what comes next. The achievement is not the point. The trajectory is the point. He's not collecting trophies. He is operating a system of continuous improvement, and the trophies are byproducts of the system operating correctly, rather than the goal around which the system is organized. This distinction might sound subtle, but it is everything. Because if the trophy is the goal, then you feel complete when you win it, and empty when you don't. Your emotional state is entirely determined by outcomes over which you have significant but not total control. But if the system is the goal, if the process of preparation and development and performance is what you're actually invested in, then every day of correct operation is satisfying in itself, regardless of the ultimate competitive outcome. You still want to win. You still feel the full weight of winning and losing. But your sense of being engaged in the right activity, of being the right kind of person, doing the right kind of work, is not contingent on the scoreline. It is contingent on the effort. And the effort is always within your control. This is what psychological resilience actually looks like. Not the absence of pain in the face of loss, but a relationship with the work that survives loss intact and returns to training the following morning. The last thing worth saying is this. Ronaldo has, in various interviews across his career, been asked what he wants people to remember about him when his career is over. He has given different answers at different times, which itself says something. But one answer has appeared repeatedly, in different formulations. He wants to be remembered as someone who gave everything, not as the best, not as the greatest, as someone who left nothing in reserve, who arrived at the end of the career having used everything that was available to be used. This is a remarkable statement of values from someone who could very easily define his legacy in terms of records and awards and trophies, all of which exist in abundance and all of which are genuinely historic. The fact that he returns, when asked the deepest version of the question, to a statement about effort and totality, rather than a statement about achievement and ranking, suggests something about what actually matters to him. It suggests that the internal experience of the project is what he is ultimately attached to, not the external validation of it. That what he wants to have been when it is over is someone who was fully present in the process, who committed completely, who did not hold back, who did not save anything for later or accept anything as good enough when something better was possible. That is an unusual ambition. It is an ambition that is, in many ways, more difficult to satisfy than the ambition to win, because winning is often partly outside your control, but giving everything is entirely within it. And perhaps that is the deepest insight this career offers. The person who defines excellence by how completely they commit to the process, rather than by whether the process produces the specific outcomes they desire, is the person who can sustain excellence across the longest possible span of time and conditions, because the external world is variable and unreliable, but the choice to give everything is available every single day, regardless of circumstances, regardless of age, regardless of what the opposition is doing or what the media is saying or what the record books currently show. It is yours, always. And if you make that choice consistently enough, for long enough, with enough intelligence and discipline and self-knowledge, the rest of it, the records and the goals and the trophies and the legacy, tends to follow. The child from Madeira understood this before he had the language to say it. He understood it in the way he stayed on the pitch after training was over. He understood it in the way he converted homesickness into work, and mockery into focus, and illness into resolve. He has been demonstrating it with extraordinary consistency for 30 years, and he will continue demonstrating it for as long as the internal standards say the work remains unfinished, which, if the past is any guide, will be for quite some time yet.